The chaos began on a quiet suburban afternoon when a patrol unit received a strange call from a neighborhood that rarely witnessed anything unusual. People reported that a police dog was barking uncontrollably in the middle of the street, running circles around a pregnant woman who seemed confused and frightened. It sounded bizarre, almost unbelievable, but what truly caught the dispatcher's attention was that the dog wasn't just any dog. It was Rex, a highly trained canine known for his discipline, intelligence, and absolute obedience. Rex had never broken protocol in his entire service history. The idea of him causing panic or acting out of control was unimaginable. Yet, the reports kept coming, each more urgent than the last, saying that the dog was in some kind of frenzy, desperately trying to get someone's attention. And at the center of it all was a young expectant mother, clutching her belly, looking pale and uncertain. Moments later, Officer Daniels arrived on the scene, the gravel crunching underneath his boots as he stepped out of his cruiser. He immediately spotted Rex, standing near the woman, barking in sharp, frantic bursts, his body tense, his tail rigid, and his breathing heavy. The woman stood stiffly, swaying slightly as if struggling to stay upright, her hand pressing against her stomach. Daniels called out to Rex, expecting the dog to snap out of whatever panic he was in, but Rex didn't even glance at him. Instead, he barked louder, more desperately, almost pleading. Daniels froze, realizing something was wrong on a level he didn't yet understand. Before Daniels could move closer, Rex suddenly lunged forward and lightly grabbed the woman's sleeve with his teeth, not to harm her, but to pull her away. The woman gasped in fear and tried to step back, but Rex refused to let go, tugging with urgent determination, growling in a way that didn't sound aggressive but rather alarmed. Daniels shouted for Rex to release, but the dog didn't listen. That alone sent a bolt of dread through the officer's chest. Rex never disobeyed, not even once. If he was ignoring commands, then something was seriously wrong. Right here, viewers, if you believe in kindness and second chances, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It helps stories like this reach more hearts. Daniels approached slowly, trying not to escalate the situation. The woman seemed terrified, her breaths coming in quick, shallow waves, her hands trembling. She kept insisting she was fine, just a bit dizzy, and that the dog was scaring her. But Daniels noticed the color draining from her face, the sheen of sweat forming on her forehead, and the slight shaking of her knees. She didn't look fine at all. Rex seemed to know that long before anyone else did. The dog barked again, stepping in front of Daniels and the woman, as if trying to shield her from something invisible. Suddenly the woman's knees buckled, and she collapsed forward, catching herself with her palms as a sharp cry escaped her lips. Rex immediately positioned himself beside her, nudging her gently, whining low, his eyes wide with concern. Daniels rushed to her, realizing this was no random incident. Something serious was happening, something urgent, something Rex had sensed before any human could. The woman's breathing was rapid now, her body curled slightly as another wave of pain hit her. Daniels radioed for medical support, but Rex wasn't waiting. The dog barked frantically toward the road, then toward the direction of the woman's car, then at Daniels, as if urging him to move faster. Daniels placed a reassuring hand on the woman's shoulder, asking about her due date and medical history, but she shook her head weakly, explaining that she wasn't due for another 2 months. Pain rippled across her face as she clutched her stomach. Her breathing became irregular, her hands trembling harder. Rex barked again, circling anxiously, his instincts screaming that something was very wrong. The woman whispered that something didn't feel right, that the pain was too sudden, too sharp, too intense to be normal. Daniels realized she might be in premature labor or facing a serious medical emergency. Just as Daniels prepared to move her carefully, Rex sprinted toward the road, barking at a passing vehicle to stop. The driver slammed the brakes, startled, but Rex wasn't barking at the driver. He kept running back and forth between the woman and the road until Daniels realized the dog was actually signaling for help from anyone who could speed up the response. The dog's urgency was so intense that even strangers began stepping out of their homes, sensing that something critical was unfolding. The woman suddenly gasped, clutching her stomach harder, her face contorted in pain. She whispered that she felt something was wrong with the baby. Her voice cracked with fear, trembling as she tried to breathe through the pain. Rex immediately pressed his head gently against her chest, whining, trying to comfort her. Daniels noticed Rex's body relax slightly, only to tense again as if the dog was trying to communicate that the woman didn't have much time. Daniels carefully lifted her to her feet, but the moment she stood, blood trickled down her legs, staining the sidewalk. Daniels nearly froze in shock, realizing the severity of the situation. Rex barked sharply at the sight, his fear turning into frantic desperation. The woman looked down and began sobbing, her voice trembling, repeating that something was wrong with her baby. Daniels carried her to his patrol car, while Rex jumped in beside her before Daniels could even command him. They sped to the hospital with sirens blaring. The woman lay in the back seat, crying out in pain, while Rex rested his head on her lap, whining softly, refusing to leave her side. The dog had become her anchor, her shield, the only thing giving her comfort in the midst of overwhelming fear. Daniels kept glancing in the mirror, watching Rex gently nudge her hand every time her breaths became too frantic. It was as if the dog knew exactly what she needed. When they arrived at the hospital, Rex refused to leave her, pushing past nurses and doctors as if declaring himself responsible for her safety. Staff shouted, but Daniels insisted they let Rex stay. The dog's instincts had already proven themselves beyond question. Inside the emergency room, doctors rushed the woman onto a stretcher. Rex paced anxiously near the doorway, whining, watching her disappear behind curtains as medical staff surrounded her. Daniels placed a hand on the dog's back, trying to calm him, but Rex shook him off and stared at the hallway with unwavering focus. It was clear he wasn't going anywhere. Minutes felt like hours. The tension in the air grew heavier with each passing moment. A doctor soon emerged from the room, his face lined with worry. Daniels braced for the worst. Rex sat upright, ears perked, eyes locked onto the doctor. The doctor explained that the woman had been experiencing a rare and dangerous complication. She had been moments away from losing consciousness, and if Rex hadn't acted when he did, both the mother and her unborn child might not have survived. Daniels felt his breath catch as he processed the magnitude of it. Rex had known before anyone else. He had sensed something invisible, something silent, something deadly, but the situation wasn't over yet. The doctors were still fighting to stabilize the baby. The complication had come too suddenly, too violently, leaving everyone praying that they were not too late. Rex whined loudly, pacing faster, sensing the fear in the air. Daniels knelt beside him, whispering that they had to trust the doctors, but Rex's anxiety didn't fade. It grew. The dog's instincts rarely failed, and his agitation now meant something was still terribly wrong. What no one knew was that a second complication had started to develop, one that the doctors hadn't detected yet. And Rex sensed it first. The world around the pregnant woman seemed to fall utterly silent as the police officers rushed her into the ambulance, but Rex remained outside, his body trembling and his eyes fixed on the doors that had closed between them. It was as if the dog had poured every ounce of his strength into his desperate attempt to warn them, and now that she was finally inside the ambulance, he stood frozen, staring, not even noticing the officers trying to pull him back. His breathing was heavy, his fur bristled, and deep inside his chest something like fear, something far more human than animal, lingered. The officers had never seen him like this. Rex was known for his controlled discipline, his fearless composure, and his ability to make instant judgment calls during operations. But now he looked like a creature caught between worlds, torn by urgency, worry, and something more intense than instinct. The EMT called out updates, the siren roared to life, and the ambulance sped down the road, leaving a trail of red and blue reflections behind it. Rex lunged forward and barked again, this time with raw anguish, as if he believed the woman's safety depended on him staying close. The officers exchanged glances filled with confusion and unease. They had responded to frantic phone calls about a disturbance involving a police dog and a pregnant woman who had suddenly collapsed, but none of them truly understood what had just happened. They had assumed Rex was malfunctioning, maybe overreacting, or responding to a threat they couldn't see. but the sight of the woman losing consciousness, combined with Rex's relentless attempts to alert them, created a strange mix of guilt and fear in their hearts. Officer Daniels radioed in for urgent updates, while Officer Maria knelt down beside the dog, trying to calm him. But Rex refused to move, refused to look away from the road where the ambulance had gone, as if part of him had left with the woman. Something in his behavior unsettled them deeply, but none of them yet realized how horrifying the truth actually was. Minutes later, Daniel's radio crackled to life with urgent chatter from the emergency room. The medical team reported that the woman's condition was far more complicated than they had expected. Her blood pressure had dropped dangerously low, her breathing was shallow, and the baby's heartbeat was fluctuating. They needed more tests to figure out the cause. Daniels felt a tightness in his chest, a heavy pressure of dread settling over him. Something was wrong, something Rex had known before any of them did. And if the dog had known that early, what else had they missed? Rex's agitation grew worse. He kept pulling toward the road, whining softly in intervals, pacing back and forth, as if fighting an invisible force. The officers decided to bring him to the hospital, hoping it would calm him. But the moment they arrived, Rex bolted forward the instant the doors opened, dragging 2 officers along the polished floors. His nails clicked rapidly on the tiles as he raced through hallways, past startled nurses and doctors, following a scent, a heartbeat, a memory, something only he understood. He skidded to a stop in front of a closed emergency room door and barked loudly, paws scratching and heart pounding. The doctors inside glanced toward the door, startled by the sound, and one of them hurried out to inform the officers that they were in the middle of stabilizing the woman. Rex refused to back away, and the staff sensed something unusual about his intensity. Eventually, one of the senior doctors stepped out to address the officers. He explained that the woman had internal bleeding they could not explain, and her baby was showing signs of strain. They needed to perform emergency procedures. Rex whimpered, lowering his head as if he understood every word. The doctor looked at the dog, then at the officers, and said something that chilled them. The woman had been minutes away from a catastrophic collapse long before reaching the hospital. Rex was right to panic. They should have brought her much earlier. The weight of that reality landed heavily on the officers, filling them with guilt. But this was still not the shocking truth hiding beneath the surface. While the medical team worked frantically, one of the nurses noticed something on the woman's clothing and arms, tiny puncture marks, almost invisible, like needle pricks. They weren't fresh, but they also weren't old. The nurse called the doctor over, then another nurse found faint marks on her ankles, as if she had been restrained. Concern grew rapidly. They informed the officers immediately, and the police instinct kicked in. Something dangerous had been happening to this woman before Rex found her. Someone had hurt her. Someone had been monitoring her. The officers realized the dog had not been barking just because she was collapsing. He was trying to protect her from a threat they hadn't seen. Daniel stared at Rex, a shiver crawling down his spine. The dog knew. But how? Moments later, the woman's husband arrived at the hospital in full panic, claiming he had been searching for her for hours. His frantic behavior seemed believable at first, until Rex suddenly growled the moment he saw him, not a protective growl, a warning, a sound of recognition mixed with fury. The husband froze, startled by the dog's reaction. The officers watched closely as Rex stepped forward, head low, teeth slightly visible, body stiff with tension. Daniels had never seen Rex behave like this toward a civilian without provocation. The dog's instincts were rarely wrong. They questioned the husband, but his answers were rushed, inconsistent, and soaked with anxiety. He insisted his wife suffered from fainting spells, that she must have wandered off, and that he had been worried sick. But Rex growled again, louder this time, barking sharply as if rejecting every word the man said. The officers took him aside for questioning, and as his voice trembled under pressure, small cracks in his story began to appear. Meanwhile, doctors worked on stabilizing the woman, discovering something horrifying, a slow-release toxin in her bloodstream, something that caused dizziness, weakness, and collapse over time. It wasn't accidental. Someone had been poisoning her. When the officers received the medical report, Everything clicked together: the needle marks, the restraint marks, the panic, and the husband's suspicious behavior. Daniels felt a surge of sympathy for the poor woman and a surge of respect for the loyal police dog standing guard outside her room. Rex hadn't just been barking at a medical emergency. He had been barking at a crime. But the most shocking part was still to come. When officers searched the couple's home, they found evidence of financial fraud, documents with the woman's forged signatures, and prescriptions issued under her name but never picked up by her. They discovered the husband was heavily in debt and had taken out a large insurance policy on her life. The officers returned to the hospital with overwhelming evidence, and when confronted formally, the husband broke down. His confession spilled out like poison. He had planned everything, hoping her condition would worsen naturally. Rex had interfered. Rex had saved her. Back in the hospital, the woman's condition finally stabilized. The poison was flushed from her system, her blood pressure normalized, and the baby's heartbeat steadied. When she woke up, frightened and confused, the first thing she saw was Rex sitting quietly beside her bed, eyes soft and gentle, as if he had been waiting only for her. She reached out weakly, her hand trembling, and Rex rested his head near her fingers, giving the faintest peaceful sigh. The nurses smiled, moved by the silent bond between a wounded woman and the dog who refused to abandon her. She learned everything: the poisoning, the arrests, the danger she didn't know she was living with. She cried softly, overwhelmed, but every time her breathing became uneven or her tears grew heavier, Rex nudged her gently, grounding her with his presence. The officers felt an indescribable respect for the dog who had seen the truth long before they had. They stayed with her through testing, recovery, and statements, making sure she felt protected. As the doctors monitored her progress, the baby remained stable, and hope returned to her tired eyes. She asked Daniels one question, one that made his voice crack slightly when he answered. She wanted to know if Rex would stay with her. Daniels smiled gently and said the dog wasn't going anywhere. And in that quiet, sunlit hospital room, the truth settled around them: a police dog had not only saved one life, but two. Rex lay beside her bed, watching her breathe, watching her heal, watching her smile slowly return. Whenever a nurse entered the room, he lifted his head protectively. Whenever the heart monitor beeped, he looked up attentively. Whenever she shifted or sighed, he adjusted himself. He had taken it upon himself to guard her until she was safe in every possible way. And the officers finally understood the depth of what had happened. Rex had trusted his instincts against the world, against confusion, against doubt. And because of that unshakable instinct, a woman and her unborn child were still alive. The night outside the abandoned warehouse grew darker as the rain intensified, turning the ground into cold puddles that reflected the flashing lights of the approaching patrol cars. The officers rushed toward the scene, stunned to find the pregnant woman barely conscious, her breathing unsteady, and the police dog standing guard over her with a look of fierce protectiveness. It was as if the dog had taken on the responsibility of keeping her alive until help arrived, refusing to let anyone come too close unless they moved with care and caution. The officers realized immediately that whatever had happened to her had been severe, and the urgency in the dog's behavior made it clear that every second mattered. The medics lifted the woman onto the stretcher, but the dog followed closely, remaining glued to her side. Even when the paramedics tried to intervene, the dog continued its desperate whines until one officer gently reassured him and placed a hand on his collar, allowing him to walk alongside the stretcher as they hurried toward the ambulance. The dog's entire body trembled with fear, yet he refused to step back. It was a silent, powerful testament to the bond he had formed with her, and no one who witnessed it could deny the depth of his concern. At the hospital, chaos erupted as staff members rushed the woman into emergency care. Though exhausted, the dog continued pacing frantically near the entrance as officers tried to keep him calm. Inside the operating room, doctors fought the clock as they worked to stabilize both the woman and her unborn child. The damage inflicted on her had been brutal, and the stress had caused severe internal complications. Every heartbeat was a fragile battle, and even the most experienced staff could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on them. As time passed slowly, officers investigated the area around the warehouse and uncovered evidence of foul play. Footprints, tire tracks, and scattered pieces of fabric told a disturbing story. The woman had not simply collapsed or wandered into danger by accident. She had been chased, cornered, and overwhelmed. What no one had realized until now was that the police dog had seen it happen from a distance during training and broke out of the controlled field to follow her scent. He had risked his life and defied every command because something inside him understood the danger she was in long before any human could. Back at the hospital, the dog began scratching at the doors, whining louder each time a nurse passed by. People in the waiting room stared in disbelief at how deeply he seemed to understand what was happening inside those walls. The officers guarding him exchanged worried glances, unsure how much longer the dog could handle the anxiety. He refused water, refused to sit, refused to be comforted. His eyes remained glued to the hallway where she had been taken, as though he feared that the moment he looked away, she would disappear forever. After what felt like hours, a doctor finally stepped into the hallway with a somber but hopeful expression. The officers stood up immediately, bracing for the worst. When they heard that the woman was alive, but in critical condition, they felt a wave of relief, but the news about her unborn child left them speechless. The baby's heartbeat was faint but present, fighting just as hard as the mother. The entire hospital seemed to collectively hold its breath, praying for both to survive the night. When they finally allowed the dog inside the recovery room, his reaction left everyone emotional. He approached her slowly, his steps hesitant and trembling, as if afraid to cause her any more pain. The moment he reached her bedside, he lowered his head onto the sheets and let out the softest whine anyone had ever heard. Nurses who had witnessed violent emergencies and heartbreaking tragedies found themselves blinking away tears. It was a rare sight to see an animal express such raw, human-like sorrow and devotion. Hours passed, and though the woman remained unconscious, her vitals slowly began to stabilize. The dog never left her side, not even when the officers insisted he take a break. The hospital staff eventually allowed him to stay, recognizing that his presence seemed to have a calming effect on her heart rate. Every small improvement in her condition aligned with moments when he touched her hand with his nose or rested his head near her arm. It was as if her mind recognized him even in the deepest layers of unconsciousness. The next morning, sunlight filtered through the hospital windows, casting warm rays across the room. The dog lifted his head as soon as he sensed a change in her breathing. Her fingers twitched slightly, and when her eyes finally fluttered open, the first thing she saw was the dog's tear-like gaze staring back at her with overwhelming relief. She burst into silent sobs, placing her hand on his head, understanding immediately that he had saved her life in a way no human ever could. Her gratitude flowed through the room like light breaking through heavy clouds. Officers standing by the doorway felt their throats tighten. It was rare to witness such purity in a connection between a human and a police dog, and even rarer to see one risk everything to protect someone during a mission that technically wasn't even assigned to him. When she tried to speak, her words were weak and trembling, but she managed to express her gratitude for the dog's courage. Her unborn child's heartbeat grew stronger that morning, and doctors quietly admitted that the emotional stability provided by the dog had likely helped. News of the incident spread quickly across the department, and soon the story reached the community. People were amazed to learn how the dog had acted on instinct and bravery, refusing to ignore his concern for the woman. Donations poured in to support her medical care, and messages of love and encouragement flooded the hospital. The officers promised her that justice would be served, and investigations into the attack intensified. Clues gathered from the scene eventually led to arrests, and the individuals responsible for endangering her and her unborn child were brought to justice. Weeks passed, and as the woman healed, the bond between her and the dog only grew stronger. The officers eventually made a decision that surprised her and everyone else. Due to the extraordinary loyalty he had shown and the undeniable connection between them, They offered her the opportunity to adopt the dog permanently after his retirement. Her reaction was immediate and emotional, her tears falling as she accepted the opportunity to give him the loving home he deserved. She knew deep in her heart that this dog had not just saved her life. He had saved her future. Months later, the baby was born healthy, and the dog remained faithfully by their side. People who saw them together often said it was like watching a guardian angel in the form of a loyal German shepherd. He protected them, guided them, and never once left the woman alone, especially during moments when she felt fragile. The officers who had witnessed that night never forgot how the dog had barked desperately, trying to warn them before it was too late. Even though tragedy had nearly struck, a miracle had taken its place instead. Near the end of the story, viewers are emotionally encouraged to like, comment, share, and subscribe if the story touched their hearts and reminded them that kindness comes from the most unexpected places. They are invited to leave a comment about the moment that moved them the most, keeping the emotional connection alive.